Okay, so Napoleon takes power. Like I said, he offers or issues a plebiscite, which means he's sending this constitution out to be voted upon by the population. And they approve a new constitution. Now, people at this period of time, just like with the Thermidorian reaction, want stability and order. And so they're willing to give up some of their rights, realizing that Napoleon is not going to carry on necessarily the reforms that the Jacobins wanted. So Napoleon takes power, and then he does a couple things. Like, if you look at your notes, I mean, the ultimate goal that he wants to do is he wants some enlightened reform, but he wants to put or move the power into his hands. And he also wants to create a system that, again, he's against the nobility in many ways, even though he invites the emigres back, but he wants to create a system where people can work their way up in society. Now, if you think about America, this is something that's very important to us, this concept that we can work our way up in society. So what does he do to do that? Well, Napoleon supports laws that's going to strengthen the central government. If you look to the right, I talk about how he's trying to weaken the power of banks. You don't really need to understand that, but I thought it was kind of interesting. And like I said, he still wants to achieve some of the goals of the revolution. So he sets up efficient method of tax collection, establishes a national banking system in order to improve the economy. So now a national banking system is where the federal government is in control of the bank. So instead of local governments, the federal government. And this has already been set up in places like the Netherlands and England in this period of time. So in this way, instead of having to go to local banks for money, the federal government now has control, much more control over the economy. And you're seeing this now at the United States, as the Fed is probably going to raise interest rates to help some people through the coronavirus epidemic. So then he tries to reduce the inefficiency and corruption in government. To do this, he sets up almost like a civil service system. He dismisses the corrupt ones, and he begins to train officials. Now, we've talked about the civil service system a lot, and a lot of this comes from China, which under the Confucians, they had a civil service system. In order to have a civil service system, a system of public employees that are going to be paid by the federal government, you need to have a good education system. So he begins to set up or fix public schooling. Graduates are going to be appointed to public office and based on merit. This is a big concept that is going to be spread throughout Europe by Napoleon. It's going to be one of his major achievements. All right, so that's a liberal reform. All right, the ability of anybody to move up. Now remember, he embodies this. He was someone who moved up in the military, which had this ability that was changed from the past of people to move up. And then I think he pulls what is a brilliant move, but it's kind of common sense. He signs the Concordat. You should know that. It was an agreement with the Pope that made Catholicism the official religion of France. Now, Napoleon was not religious, but he understood that the people of France were, and that gets people on his side. And the other part of this agreement, which wasn't in the textbook, that's a major aspect that we've talked about in the past, is that he is able to, or the Pope recognizes or agrees to this, but isn't going to come out against the fact that the federal government has taken and sold off much of the church land during the terror and early parts of the revolution. So those moneyed men are still going to control a great deal of the land and power. So the church is going to be the official religion, but in many ways it's going to lose power under Napoleon. And the greatest work, and to his death, his greatest accomplishment was the Napoleonic Code. I think you should know that. Now, while he didn't write the Napoleonic Code, he was strongly influential and was in on all the meetings of when it was written. And this is basically, and we've talked about this with the enlightened despots, is he's systematizing the law so that everybody is going to have the same rights underneath the law, and that's going to be protected by the federal government. Now, if you remember in the past, in the early parts of the revolution, priests were tried differently in church courts, and nobility in different parts of France had different courts, so you could buy your way out depending on who you knew. Now it's going to be centralized. And In actuality, it was probably less free than previous laws under the Jacobins, because he wanted authority, and instead of protecting individual rights, it's going to be something more about protecting property rights. So the men of property are going to be more protected, just like the Thermidorian reaction. He's going to limit freedom of speech because he understands that criticism of some of the things that he's going to do. So he's going to censor the press, and he's going to restore slavery throughout the colonies. So while this wasn't super progressive, in many ways because it was more practical or pragmatic, um, it had a longer lasting impact. Now, why would he restore slavery? Is money, all right? If you're going to be fighting all these wars, which are going to be coming up in a little bit, the colonies were a boon to trade in France, and those merchant class men needed that money because remember, they're selling goods to the colonies and getting sugar in return, especially in Saint Dominique. All right, I always say that word wrong, but so he's consolidating his power, developing a bureaucracy, becoming stronger, financing it, limiting people's ability to question him, and becoming the sole most powerful ruler of France. What will he do next? All right. So I talked, and this slide's a little redundant, but so I'll go over it quick. In Christmas Eve of 1800, shortly after Napoleon becomes the power, he just missed being killed on his way to a theater. So this was thought to be part of a royalist plot. But Napoleon, again, he's trying to gain control of France. So these are some of the things in this notes that I wanted to review. He accused anarchists. All right, anarchists are going to be people who want to destroy the government. That's more complicated than that, but that's how I'll describe it right now. So this is how he's going to consolidate his power and kind of he mistrusted the Jacobins the most, which he should, because I mean, if you look at how the Jacobins, they were very extreme in the past, and they probably align with his goals the least. In hindsight, the people who tried to kill him were people who were royalists. They wanted to get a king back in power, which would have been Louis's brother. So I told you that he set up a council, a legislator, all chosen by him, basically. He gets rid of government officials, most of the Jacobins. I talk about that. He invited these emigres back. Those are the people who left France during the Terror, because they had money and they had power throughout, not even just France, but the rest of the world. So these people, by bringing them into his civil service system, which he did, he was able to gain more support through different people that would support his ideas more. I told about how he established censorship. All right, you look at the article on the right; it's all in France. Like I said, I don't know what it's talking about, but I'm pretty sure that if you read a newspaper, it would say positive things about Napoleon, and he would be in charge of the media. He was very good in understanding that. If you remember, when he returned from Egypt, he must have known people in certain media organizations that really, really promoted him. And if you remember yellow journalism, which is happening, like 70 years after this, 80 years after this, in American history, there's always been that relationship of the press picking sides and supporting certain people. You would hope it would be more complicated than that today, but we don't know. Establishes a secret police. I mean, this happened in every enlightened person. You give people freedoms, you see that people start to rebel against the government, so you have to form a police, seeing who are the people on your side and who are the people not on your side. Otherwise, you will have no power. And he creates something called the Legion of Honor. That's the last thing I wanted to go over. This would be for people who had exceptional service to the state, mostly meaning Napoleon. For the most part, it was military men, but there were also local officials, people who did exceptional things for service to the state. Many number of people received it. I think you received a medal, and then you received an income for the rest of your life if you received the Legion of Honor. Now, this was considered kind of controversial because some people thought this was a return to the idea of the nobility. Our famous man who keeps coming up throughout this course, Lafayette, was issued the Legion of Honor by Napoleon and actually turned it down for those reasons. So we see within this consolidation of power, some people are beginning to question it, but the voices are not going to be strong yet.